Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the German Revolver Model 1883, the lighter, handier Reichsrevolver. Let's get a closer look. Shortened down to just 8.9 inches in length, this gun is of course much lighter at only 2.1 pounds. Amazing. The cylinder still carries 6 rounds of the same 10.6mm cartridge loaded singularly and without an ejector. They are discharged one at a time as before, single action only. This, of course, means the safety is still a bizarre addition. Mae says that I need to drive engagement here, so I'm going to point out that Carolina mustard sauce is the superior barbecue, period. You're all wrong. Now, if you're imagining Carolina honey mustard, well then you must recognize the fact that there really is evil in the world. If you're watching this episode without watching the one immediately prior, you may as well stop right now because our gun today is both an adaptation of and a direct response to the Reichsrevolver model of 1879. For those of you still too lazy to look, this was the German Empire's first official handgun, nearly 3 pounds and over 13 inches in length. It was a massive, cavalry-oriented single action, and it was proving difficult to use for much of anything else. We've seen firsthand that the original Reichsrevolver isn't just big, it's also an ergonomic challenge for normal people hands. Now I know you lot, and before a number of you start mumbling away about the giant palmed men of yesteryear with their manly grips, I assure you human beings were smaller at the time, and despite excellent hand strength, their digits were every bit as stubby, if not more so. This isn't just an opinion, nor is it necessary for anybody to go dig up a bunch of medical records. We know it to be true because they made this gun here, the 83, which has dimensions much closer to, I don't know, every other handgun of the era? It's fairly obvious that, well, this gun here is an odd duck, and when it was issued to cavalry who saw it as practically secondary to their swords, or to field artillery who weren't really expected to fight with small arms unless something went wildly wrong, well, in those somewhat auxiliary roles, the problems weren't so glaring. But there were a growing number of units who needed a handgun in the modern German army who were lacking any specifics. For infantry officers and NCOs, the sword was falling away and a variety of revolvers had stepped in to fill that gap. This may have been what spawned an industry producing these often nameless compact manual safety revolvers in Germany and Belgium, though they tend to persist for some decades. This situation almost saw the return of the Colt single-action army chambered in the German 10.6mm cartridge, as in 1882 several were purchased by Saxony and perhaps Württemberg as well, who were likely looking for an officer's model. Of course, our gun today would halt any need for distasteful American contracts. Officers were not the only ones suffering for a lack of a handier handgun. There were also units specifically tasked with carrying a pistol who were supposed to be armed by the army directly. Wilhelm I of Prussia had made a somewhat ambiguous ruling back in 1868, before the final unification even, that stretcher bearers would no longer have carbines but instead should carry revolvers. The only problem with that is that there were no revolvers to give them at the time, and there was no money to go find revolvers, so Wilhelm specified that they should get them as soon as a model was determined, and in the meantime they could avail themselves of the then presently, handy Model 50 single-shot pistols. Yeah, these are not a great option, but the Model 79 Reichsrevolver wasn't impressing them either when it finally came out. So another commission at Spandau was tasked with improving the 79, adapting it into a lightened form while retaining the key mechanical features. Now, again, we're a bit short on original paperwork with, the wars and all wiping it all out, so we don't know who was in charge of this work, and I sadly don't have any names to name, but let's get into what our mystery engineers did, because we do have at least a list of what happened. The barrel was shortened from 180 to 118 millimeters. The barrel diameter was also thinned. The octagonal shank was reduced in length, and the muzzle ring was ditched. The sights were reduced in height, the grip was shrunk and tightened up, even the lanyard ring was shrunk. More relief cuts were made in the cylinder, and a smaller safety lever was fitted. Can't forget the safety. All these efforts netted a weight savings of 370 grams, about 13 ounces. That's a fair improvement just on the weight and ergonomics, but it doesn't stop there. But I can probably actually best show you what else happened by taking a closer look at the example we have. Alright, this is already a lot handier than the old 79. Let me get that guy in here actually, and just look at the difference in the grips. I mean, this is designed for a human hand. While we're kind of having them together, take a look at the finishes. I don't know if it's coming through on camera, but this is a duller brown color. This is a more polished blue. That is by design. These were supposed to be this color. These are supposed to be this color, a more normal blue as we would expect it, and a higher polish. Not necessarily high polish, but higher than the 79. Also, this gun should have a lanyard ring. I'm not sure why this one doesn't, and it looks like it hasn't for quite a long time, or maybe never did. It's weird, but there should be a lanyard ring there. Just pretend with your imagination. Now, in terms of the action, same thing. Single action only. Safety works mostly the same way, although I'm going to poke in just a second. And it's the Smith & Wesson style internals. While I'm talking about that safety, I might as well tell you, in this case, it does appear there's been some sort of fix because on the 83s I have encountered, I cannot spoof them into dropping the hammer. I do believe that was a bug. I have only handled 2 79s, I've handled about 4 83s, and it seems to hold true for all of them. If it doesn't hold true for you, maybe it was something that was fixed still in production of 79s, but between the guns I have, this is now fixed so that you can't finagle dropping the hammer onto a live round with the safety on. Okay, in terms of actual solid mechanical changes that we do understand, the takedown lever was the big problem on the 79, and it is gone. We now have this spring, this flat spring on one side, and then on the other side, we have a push button. Let me get where you could probably see that a little bit better in the front camera. That button right there. Now, if I want to take the gun apart, I just have to push this button in firmly and pull on this forward rod. I'm of course going to cover up the screen a lot while I try to do that because it's a little tight. So I push the button, the rod's free, and good Lord, is this particular one snug. Oh, there we go, okay. Rod is out, open the gate, cylinder is free, same as everything else on the 79. There's no big changes here. However, I will say there are some other improvements. Actually, let me go ahead and reassemble this one second. The rear sight, specifically on the 1879, had proved to be a real problem for hardening. I'm not entirely sure the metallurgical reasons why, but they gave up on it on these guys. So the sights were lowered a bit so they didn't stick out as much, but they still take wax a little bit easier. If you look at this gun, there's a couple little dings on there, and then a lot of the 83s I've seen have damage in this zone, either chipped on the sides or punched or marred around. It's very rare to see a 79 that has any damage to its sights because they were better hardened. It's just that this proved to be too much of a pain in the butt to do. I mean, look at this one's nice and crisp still. So just a little interesting tidbit for you. Now, also different from the 79 is the fact that this does not use a brass ejector rod. It still has a separate ejector. So this is a 79 ejector rod that we saw last time. Instead, this has a separate piece of technology that I was unfortunately not able to get an original for, so I had to go with a reproduction. I'm very sorry. In this case, we did not go the 3D printed route like we had to do for our shooting footage on the last episode. In this case, I had to handcraft one. Let me tell you, it took hours because from the German field manuals, essentially, we understand that this was a roughly 1 centimeter thick, 20 centimeter long wooden rod. I poured my heart and soul in this gentleman. This is standard issue for a Reichsrevolver 1883. This is how you unload your gun. You gotta put the wooden stick in the hole. High technology, let me tell you. In addition to this, you may also find a larger one, if you're lucky actually. If you see something that looks like this, a wooden stick, but maybe a little narrower and a little longer, and it has kind of a jag on one end. Those actually were standard cleaning rods for the 83s as well, so don't throw away every little piece of wood that you can't understand when you're digging through old collectibles, let me tell you. It's interesting to note that there appears to be no formal introduction of the 1889, none of the usual royal declaration out of Prussia. Instead, it was just quietly put to work, and so we'll ask Mae to do the same. Oh yeah, that is way better, at least from what I saw. Okay, we have a new revolver, so let's talk about producing it. The Royal Prussian inspectors of the rifle factory at Spandau had been responsible for the trial's guns and were now in charge of assembling technical data, dimensional tables, and sample copies of these revolvers, which could be sent out to the various German kingdoms. That should sound very familiar from our last episode. Each would be responsible for their own manufacture, largely by purchasing from private firms. Prussia would order 10,000 pieces for their stretcher bearers. They went with the Soll Consortium, which was down to just V.C. Schilling and C.G. Haenel at this point. Sauer & Son had gone over to exclusively non-military firearms manufacture at this point. This was largely in response to those inconsistent contracts and the need to constantly expand and retract your business. We actually spoke a bit about this in our episode on the much later Sauer 1913 pistol. 2 years later, Prussia would finally decide to provide for NCOs, color bearers, drummers, and others. Around the same time the old 79 was phased out, and all units carrying it were ordered to go ahead and keep them, but there would be no further orders, so replacements or expansions they're not happening. That would mean more 83s would get ordered. Eventually, everyone is getting the new Reichsrevolver. This time the contract would go to Dreyse, who received a 13,000 unit order in 1885. From there, Prussia chose to more actively rearm the artillery, while also expanding the number of regiments. This created a massive demand and another buy-up. This time they procured them at the Royal Prussian Gun Factory Erfurt. Because there was no commercial contract, we have no solid record of production, but it's estimated at roughly 92,500 from surviving examples. Next up, Bavaria would formally introduce the Model 83 in June of 1884, where it was provided to both medical orderlies and NCOs. They would also contract with the Soll Consortium for 3,000 revolvers at first. We actually know the price here, 31 marks per handgun. Later in June of 1889, a smaller order would be placed with Dreyse for just 860 revolvers. In 1891, they also decided to arm their artillery with the 83, and so another 4,296 were purchased from Soll again. Württemberg purchased their Model 83s from, you guessed it, Mauser Obendorf, of course. They only needed 1,500 though. Moving along to Saxony, they would also adopt in 1884, again another Soll customer, initially for just 2,000 standard 1883s for NCOs and various troops. Saxony had a clever idea here, by the way. Their contract stipulated that Soll had to use the Prussian gauges and inspection devices, avoiding the cost of setting up their own. They would ultimately end up with 10 contracts, though only 8 of them were what I'd call true acquisition. All these were with Sol and resulted in 10,500 standard serialized guns, 33 in their own numbering sequence. Now that figure is just a wee bit off because in their initial contracts, Saxony would purchase not just 2,000 regular 1883s, but also 2,000 officers' 1883s. These had finer bluing and checkered grips. These were purchased specifically to be sold to officers, but in Saxony by 1887, fewer than 600 had been claimed, so the balance were contracted into standard inventory for issue to NCOs and cavalry. Bavaria had also gone in this direction to the tune of 1,181 pieces in total. Württemberg ordered their officer models from Mauser Obendorf, which were apparently fewer than 300 pieces. Prussia did not arrange a group buy for their officers, so they had to just go buy them on their own. As I've said before, officers would often choose non-standard sidearms, but more often than not, they still wanted something in the same 10.6mm cartridge. This allowed them a simpler allotment for training ammunition, and in war it would be much more reliably sourced ammunition too. In addition to chambering the same ammo, some went further and bought upgraded versions of the 1883. Two designs stand out specifically. The first looks just about identical to a standard 83, but actually sports a double-action trigger. This was offered by members of the Sul Consortium, mostly C&Rsenal. There's also a double trigger variation, which was also apparently made in small numbers by Haenel, but was far more commonly provided by Dreyse. In this gun, the fore trigger cocks the hammer, and the aft trigger fires the gun. I've been told it's not nearly as light as you would expect, though. Now, those two common examples are not exhaustive. I've seen like 83s with fixed ejector rods, like a Colt Single Action Army, for example. And of course, flat out different guns in 10.6mm abound. Many might be currently noted as being in 44 Russian, but really it's 10.6. Returning to the official 1883, there were a couple updates. In late 1894, Erfurt would reinforce the cylinder stops. I don't have an example, but here's an approximation so you get the idea. In April of 1895, there was an order to change the finish. That bright polished blue of the 83 wasn't holding up well, and it was pretty hard to touch up on refurbishment. The browning, that sort of darker color, the less pretty color, the 79, was supposed to come back, but it appears they may have only just dropped the polishing part, as the late 83s are still more blue in color, but not as polished. Last, the lanyard ring, again I don't have one of these, was ever so slightly enlarged in 1896, and that is also the last year I know of for production. That's because Germany was looking to replace the 83 with a more modern handgun, and at first they were considering another revolver. As far back as 1891, attempts were made to swap over to smokeless powder. The matter stalled a bit, and then dragged into the automatic pistol argument. Germany was kind of worried about adopting a more modernized revolver just in time for automatic pistols to take the stage. They were afraid of doing what they did with the Reichsrevolver, being behind the curve right at the start. However, as we know in hindsight, it would take many more years before they would become common martial technology. As the matter dragged on, Prussia would again push for a more sensible revolver, and so in December of 1896 ordered Spandau to construct 6 examples of an experimental pattern. I only know of this drawing, which shows what is clearly a Galan-styled single and double action with a Nagant-styled swing-over ejector and an Abadie loading gate. It apparently retained the same cartridge with a slight reduction in powder. These trials revolvers ended up being halted because of the excellent performance of an emerging automatic pistol. This was when Germany would begin trials of the Mauser C96. We've covered this gun in detail before, and while it was not actually adopted until the war, it spelled the end of German revolvers. Well, the end of new German revolvers. Instead, the matter of a handgun would be kicked all the way down the line until the adoption of the Luger. Well, Lugers, with your cartridge dictated by the Marshall branch in this particular case. We've covered the P08 in 2 episodes already, though. That late pistol adoption does mean that the Reichsrevolvers got to serve on for quite a while, and although they were now relegated to distant third-line roles or sitting in storage by the time the Luger emerges, they were still on hand when war were declared. I miss doing that. With the onset of World War II, most nations quickly realized just how short they were on troops and armament. Germany was no exception, and the Reichsrevolvers were both put back into service. 79s were fewer in number, so they could be effectively limited to use with men on horseback, usually the mounted battery. They also were already in the hands of the mounted gendarmerie in many cases, and in 1890, the regular walkie gendarmeries had actually gotten a hold of the 83. These likely stayed in place, and then border guards and custom also had their own revolvers where appropriate. Mostly, the 83 was in the hands of the field artillery, where they were most common in 1914, having not quite been displaced by the carbine or the upcoming LP08 pistol. They also could stand in with messengers, drivers, or other rear-line troops. 10.6 ammunition production was also spun back up, revealing that the guns were of course seeing some use. Due to ending manufacture of the leather cartridge cases, it looks like the wartime production managed to mostly displace these old revolvers sometime around 1916, I think. So they probably became less common from there. While both models saw some limited post-war police use, they were not a feature in World War II for any major army or police action. However, paperwork has emerged that a limited number of, you won't believe this, the Model 79s had served with the Reich Finance Administration through the Second Great Kerfuffle. They were used to guard cash registers and service buildings until 1945. That's some longevity for a monster handgun. All right, with all that covered, let's get over to Mae and get her opinion on the 83. Let's see if perhaps this might be the redeeming Reichsrevolver. All right, gang, once more, we've made room for Mae.
Woo!
And we have a much more compact Reichsrevolver, so let me get that into your hands.
Fun.
I suppose I should probably reach down here and pull out this guy.
Oh my god. Yeah, okay, so difference in sizing. Yeah, it's...
Look at that beautiful job we did of covering it with our hands while we told you.
Woo! For professionals.
Since
here.
mine's bigger, it's better. End of show.
Yeah, clearly that's how this works.
Yeah.
Bigger is better in the show for the gun.
All right, this is going to be a weird conversation because it's the same action, same cartridge, same everything.
Pretty much. Just we're looking at a smaller size, more compact. Different
and
grip
lighter.
angle. Yeah. Different grip angle too. It's not quite, if you look at the 79, it kind of swings out with its curve. Yeah, more banana. This is more...
I think I'm going to call this my combat banana.
This is like a really ripe banana that's just, you're like, ooh, we got to take that one down. It doesn't look so good because it's droopy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a teardrop.
Oh, maybe that's a plantain.
Oh, banana, plantain.
Right.
Different colors too.
Yeah, whoever refinished this, they made it too bright, but now that it's yellow, I think I am going to go with calling this the banana.
That's fair. You're allowed.
Anyway, let's talk about the 83. So you got more compact grip.
Yep.
It's also steeper.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's naturally easier to grip in general.
Right.
But I will say, I mean, it doesn't quite 100% still tell you where to grip it. I guess maybe like right here, my middle finger tends to fall behind the trigger guard pretty easily.
Yeah, it'd be nice if
that too high?
It'd be nice if you had anything back here to sort of guide the webbing of your hand, because your webbing of your hand is really not engaged.
No, it's not at all.
Not the top of it at all.
There's so much room to slip and again bump your knuckle on that safety.
Yeah, but your palm is very much more engaged.
True, which that's not too bad. It is definitely an improvement. I'm not going to say it isn't. Mm-hmm. Still could be better.
Not as barrel heavy.
No, not as barrel heavy. The size improvement is nice. The safety's pretty much the same. Trigger's the same. The hammer on this one I did notice was a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to pull. So like a few of them I did get a few single thumb workings of it, but...
I'm rootin' tootin'. I'm going to pull both hammers. Let's find out.
Well, you're doing that with your left hand.
That's fine. I'm strong in both hands.
I believe you. They're different strengths.
I will say, I agree with Mae. The hammer spring on the 83 in this particular instance feels, I would say, about 10% lighter.
Yeah, so...
Not a lot.
No, it's not significant. And granted, by the time we got to this one, I'd already been struggling with the 79 a few times. We did a few shoots to get that one right. So when I got to this one, I was a bit worn out and couldn't quite operate it as much as I would have liked with the single thumb, but I got a few single pulls in.
Yeah, but I'm going to say, even if they were exactly the same
Yeah.
hammer weight, it is drastically easier to cock that one.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Just from the hand, just from the grip, just being able to get up on the grip.
Yeah, seriously, like you're able to really wedge your finger like underneath, and he's right, you have a better positioning for your palm so that you can actually get a good solid grip on that and pull back all the way.
Right.
Like I'm actually able to use my middle fingers up against the trigger guard here to provide myself some extra leverage.
Yeah, I'm also noticing you able to cock that yourself with one hand when you haven't just put 3 mags through this trying to, well, cylinders through this trying to
I figured I knew
play with it. The problem we had on range with this gun, by the way, especially the 79, is that this gun is very, very, it doesn't have a trigger block.
Mm-mm.
It doesn't have a trigger hold safety thing. So essentially, in a lot of revolvers, if you go to cock the hammer and you're not actually squeezing the trigger and you just let go of that hammer, it'll go all the way down to the rebound position, but not actually hit the primer. This gun is not like that. You can get into a position where you can snap the primer and it will go bang and send a zinger.
Yeah, so
like it can over travel.
That's not good.
So the one thing Mae did not want to do is be up here with a fixed berm and send a flyer. So
like at one point, like you could see, I almost managed to get it all the way back, and I went, nope, I'm gonna use my extra thumb. I'm just gonna use a little extra pressure to push down.
If anybody was out in those woods hunting that day, they're very glad you're on the berm. That's, safety first, and then
always
historical advantage later.
Yeah, true.
So, but this gun less so. I don't get terrified of sending a zinger with this one.
No, I mean, to be fair, like we talked about, just that little bit of difference in the hammer spring pressure, it really does impact that.
And then the ergonomics. Really, the ergonomics are the killer. Like, they're doing much better.
Oh, yeah.
So, what's it like pulling the trigger? Is it dramatically different? It's same cartridge, lighter gun. You should have more recoil.
Yeah, the recoil is higher with this one, I would say. And I mean, the only issue still comes with, no matter what, if you're not white knuckling this guy or the 79, you're still going to bang your knuckle up against that safety. Like, I swear, it was still something I had to be really hyper aware of. And I just got used to it over time. You even tried it and you thought
I banged my knuckle the first time.
Yeah, it was amazing.
But then you get used to it. And the problem is, I feel like you end up having to grip it harder than you want to grip a handgun.
Yeah, it's not something, I think you're losing accuracy when you're having to grip something that hard. You just start shaking a little too much.
Did they fix the sights?
No, I wish they had, because honestly, come on. What's funny is the front blade here, it actually looks a little bit taller.
No, they're actually...
Are they the same?
No, they're actually technically a little lower. The 83, they had, I think I said this in the episode, they had trouble hardening the sights on the 79s. It was a very difficult process, apparently.
Okay.
Or it led to some other failure. I'm not sure what. So instead of hardening the sights, they just made them a little smaller on the 83s so that they didn't have to harden them. And now you'll see 83s with all sorts of dings and dangs on their rear sights. But it's still a very tiny notch with a very broad, flat rear.
Yeah, it's the same thing as before, where you're trying desperately to find the sight, like by just moving it suddenly out from behind the rectangle block of the rear sight. Oh, there it is. You just find it in between.
I find it nerve-wracking trying to shoot. Like, I couldn't imagine trying to shoot one of these to defend your life, because you got to put so much time into that single action cock. Mm-hmm. And then you better land your shot, but where the heck did your front sight just go?
Yeah.
And then once you fire it, you have to go through this gross manipulation again and then find your front sight again.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like fun to me. And then on top of that, the only other difference, that one came with a brass
the
ejection rod. Yeah. I'm just trying to think of the rest.
The 79 came with a brass ejector rod.
Cool, separate.
The 83 came with a stick.
You spent some time on that stick. It did a good job.
I'm not gonna lie though. Does this make any difference to you?
Not really.
Yeah, I'm not hurting. Like, I'll take the stick. Who cares?
Sure. It's honestly, the stick seems like something I'll find on the ground somewhere.
I just carry my keys. Yeah. Knock it out with those. Like, it's so silly. So, okay, would you call this a significant improvement over the 79?
I mean, I would call it an improvement over the 79. The thing is, yes, there are some significant improvements. It's got the better grip. It's got the better grip angle. The hammer's slightly better in terms of the weight difference. Yeah, the overall gun itself doesn't weigh quite as heavy, and it's not muzzle heavy.
It got rid of the takedown lever.
It did. It got rid of the takedown lever, which you remember you talking about how those would get dinged up. And, yeah, exactly. So cool. Yeah, they are trying to make this stronger, and it is a more improved Reichsrevolver. I can't deny that.
So would you bet your life on one?
Hell no.
Would you be okay if you were issued one?
Hell no.
Okay.
I mean, no, it's still a Reichsrevolver. I've still got better options. Now it's 83. Yes, I've got better options.
No, to be fair, I want to be clear here. We've shot other 1870s handguns for this series.
Yeah.
The Chamelot Delvine is a very good example of a useful single and double action. The Belgians had the Nagant. Very useful, beautiful single.
Very useful.
Yeah. Although they were, they were getting into that, I think 9.4, I believe, was with them. So they were starting to have smaller bore. They were modernizing. So if we're thinking about old guns, well, then the Reichsrevolver is sort of the last of a hybrid era. Well, it's so weird to explain it, but they're like, the Reichsrevolver is like the last of the single action centerfires, which is actually a very limited short era, Mm-hmm. And so when you compare it to that, like, I mean, I shouldn't even say single action. Yeah, I started to say single action, and I realized, no, I've got a gasser here, the single and double action gasser of 1870. So if we look at the gasser, and you'd have to watch our episode on it, but it's got a thumb screw on it. We laughed at some of the things that are on this thing,
Right, but it's still got an ejector rod on the gun.
Yeah, the ejector rod's on the gun, and then on this side, there's a spring here that acts as a hammer block until you pull that trigger, which is doing what that manual safety is doing, essentially.
Right.
So...
And I've got single and double action.
Yeah, I don't see what the problem was with... I mean, I get that it's probably more delicate than that gun.
Technically, yeah, I could honestly see that wing nut. That looks like a wing, like just a wing nut there that you could get knocked off. I feel like
I'd just take care of my revolver and prefer one of these. You know what I mean? And then if you're talking about single actions, don't forget Germany saw one of these guys. I mean, not made by Oberdi. This is a reproduction, but a Colt single action army style gun.
Not bad.
Maybe not the same barrel length, maybe not the same features. But you've handled cowboy guns like this, and don't get me wrong, they're newer production. They're not 100 years old, but even... at the time, they all would have been factory new. Which one are you going for between this and that?
I mean, I'm honestly probably going to go with this. Just because I know that...
You can read the sights.
Yeah, I can read the sights, and I've got the ejector rod on the gun itself. This is overall going to be... And I've got single and... Well, no.
No, you don't have double.
No, I don't have double. I've just got single.
Now, the hammer spring's light on this one. I don't know how heavy it would have been at the time.
Oh, yeah. This is a reproduction, so God only knows.
But the ergonomics.
It's way better. That grip.
Like,
that grip
point that and find... Okay, hold on.
Is...
The audience can't see this. Point that and find your front sight.
Yeah, way easier.
No.
It's not as tall.
Let it down. And then, I'm serious. Okay. Point it and just tell us when you found your front sight.
Found it.
Okay, now, here. Point this and tell us when you found your front sight. By the way, 1883 at this point. Okay, we're already cocked, ready?
Found it.
Yeah,
it's a split second shorter.
For it.
Yeah,
you're
the problem is that I find it on this one. Those sights are much wider, and the rear sight may not be quite as tall as this one, but it's not blocking out what is the front sight. It's actually enabling me to locate it much faster than this one is. It's not hiding the front sight.
I'm going to make the argument that even if, and by the way, again, modernized to some degree because it's a reproduction, but even if these had the same sights, I'm going to argue that this grip that telegraphs where your hand should be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you find your palm, you have this tulip at the back that puts you in. Granted, there's nothing up here to spur. There's nothing to really give you a webbing point.
No.
But it's still so much better in terms of where to find yourself.
Ergonomically, it's just way better.
I feel like as much as I want to hate on the Reichsrevolver as an anachronism when it was adopted, it's not the mechanism. It's not the fact that it's single action. It's not the fact that it's gate loading. It's not even the laughable fact that it has no ejector. It's the ergonomics that have really destroyed these guns. Yeah,
it doesn't make it easy for you as a shooter, someone who's even inexperienced or maybe firsthand of this. It doesn't make it easy for you to figure out and be able to do well with out of the gate. It doesn't make it easy for anyone in that.
Yeah, I feel like when I hold a Reichsrevolver, I'm holding like a pre-Civil War gun.
Yeah.
But they're still cool, and there's certainly...
Oh, yeah.
Would you ever want to own one?
Well, Yeah, actually, because they're a very unique gun if you think about it. They're massive and strange, and they're not like anything else. Really, they really are very unique. They're not even like they're like we brought out the Gasser as a joke or many times, showing like it's this massive hunky revolver. Oh my god, it's so strange. And then you bring out the Reichsrevolver, and it's like, this is just funny.
Yeah.
This is unique in and of itself. Yeah, I can't honestly. I prefer if I was going to have between the two, even though I had an easier time shooting the 83. I'd rather have the 79 if I had to pick one of the two, because that is just so different and massive and weird looking that I can't say no to that.
Yeah. I'm gonna give you one chance to give the Reichsrevolver a win. Are you ready?
One chance.
All right. You're on the battlefield. Okay. You're completely out of ammunition, and you only have a handgun. Any handgun of your choosing. Okay? So you now need to beat someone to death with your handgun. Can you pick a better gun than the Reichsrevolver 79?
Actually, no, probably not. That one's pretty strong. It's I was looking at the Gasser thinking, because that's heavy. An iron frame.
It's going to bend, and it's going to snap right there.
Right.
If I have to beat a man to death.
That's the one to beat somebody with.
All right. It's the billy club of the handgun world.
Oh my god, that is really good.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that analysis, as terrible as it was.
I thought it was pretty good. We did a good job.
It's the highest brow show ever made. Stay tuned after the credits for any updates. Of course, everything changes all the time. And have a good one, guys.
Yeah, have a good evening.
Hey gang, if you're not a patron yet, I'd like to remind you that we have an ongoing behind-the-scenes podcast, and thanks to our trip out west last week, the latest episode is huge and features both Ian from Forgotten Weapons and Matt from Fudbusters. I've been told by quite a few people it's been their favorite thing that we've recorded to date. Remember, the podcast is available to all patrons, even at the $1 level. That means you're donating 50 cents per episode of Primer. Moving on, I'd like to thank the guys over at Collectors for giving us a lovely tour and just being genuinely fun to hang out with. Also, we've seen a lot of familiar faces given temporary or permanent bans on various social media lately, and just in case, we've taken the time to set up a MeWe account as a backup. While we can't chase down every alternative social media, we are going to try to give you guys some options. Finally, don't forget we've added a page on our own website to help you negotiate the various firearms featured on Primer, so come check it out.